then the other side is it's about this time that you, maybe because of being inspired by people like Geisen and Burroughs, you start to put yourself through a version of hell. You know what I mean? From my perspective, and I only know you a little bit, but I always saw you in the lineage of that. Like, I am the experiment. You know, I'm willing to put myself through these. Well, you tell me.
No, I lived the experiment.
That's what I'm saying. Were you inspired by that crowd? Was that part of your thinking, or was that just who you were?
I think, yeah, that type of thinking got me into a situation where I was the experiment, where I lived with Tim Leary for a long time, and he would try out new strains of MDA or whatever, and I would inject it in front of him, and he would take notes, and all this crazy stuff went on. We started out with 3 guinea pigs. It was me, Mike Scascia, and Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers at Timothy Leary's house, and he would do Friday experiments on us. We shoot up this like new psychedelic that some university had come up with. Okay, sounds good. Like 10 minutes later, you're like seeing spiders converge on you and stuff. It's like, it was crazy, but there were some good trips too and all that. But I like being the experiment of it, and I also like being away from the band at Tim's. Like, I quit the band for about 1.5 years, and I think Barker and Chris Connolly tried to like resurrect the band with Chris Connolly as singer.
Yeah, I seem to have a faint memory.
But it didn't really go well until I was ready. And then Tim just started, it just gets to the point where like every Friday becomes like, oh my God, no. I'm over this. And so I'm like, hey guys, I think I'm going to come back to the band now.
But take what's...
Okay, quite the way to start a show. That is Al Jorgensen. For those that don't know, he is the lead singer, the major intelligent creative behind the 90s industrial band named Ministry. They are really considered one of the founders of industrial music. You can see that there. This time that he's living with Timothy Leary is at the peak of his career, right after they released Psalm 69. So Ministry is really at one of the most popular and well-known bands in the world. They just finished their 92 Lollapalooza tour, which I was at, and Timothy Leary came out at the beginning of that concert and told everybody to tune in, turn on, and drop out, or whatever his term is. He was there. I remember. I saw him. And that tour was Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all really at their peak. And Ministry was there, Ice Cube, and a few others. It was quite amazing. One of the best concerts I've ever seen. And so Al Jorgensen's there admitting that he lived with Timothy Leary. So he took a break from the band, goes and lives in Timothy Leary's Beverly Hills mansion for 1.5 years and does experiments there, he says, weekly, every Friday night, where he would get drugs from the universities and hospitals. So one of the hardest things for people to understand when we were talking about 60s counterculture and the LSD coming from universities and hospitals was that aspect that people just couldn't believe that hospitals or universities would be supplying LSD to people. And that's exactly what happened. We'll get into it because Ken Kesey was one of the major distributors coming out of Palo Alto Veterans Hospital in San Francisco. This is all documented historical fact, but there's more surrounding all of that area that we'll get into today. And then, so Jorgensen ended up being like a hub of musical influence at his studio. People were flying in from all over the world to write their albums, including Trent Reznor, the band Filter. Reznor was actually a roadie for Ministry and Jorgensen and Ministry really considered the founders of industrial metal. And really, what does he do after that? After his time with Timothy Leary?
Step back because I'm fascinated by this because, unlike probably most people in the world who are a fan of yours, I was actually sort of around this atmosphere around you. The legend of Al in Chicago was probably bigger than the real Al, but the legend took on a life of its own. You hear these crazy stories, but from the inside, where most people, when they would talk about you, it'd be kind of like like shaking their head, like, can you believe this happened? But I always saw you in this lineage of, like, let's call it the mystic visionaries or something. Did you see yourself in that way?
I did after post 10.
Okay.
Then it's
but say like the land of rape and because you tell me because you were there.
No, we were still trying to find our way. I mean, we did something that was not done before. It's like basically cross-pollinating author techniques with music techniques and this and that, and put it together and this and that, and put politics in there too. But we didn't know what we were doing.
Right.
And even the next one, then we started adding more of a metal element when Mike Scasha joined the band. And we still didn't know what we were doing because we're still clawing our way around, trying to figure it out. And then by the time that we got popular after Psalm 69, with Phil's Pig, everything started falling apart, and I just pretty much, that record is mine. Like,
yeah,
ran out of politics, ran out of band members, just kind of me in a studio, and yeah, I mean, a couple of people came in and contributed stuff, but I just remember being stuck there for a long time doing Phil Pig, and everybody hating it when it came out.
Okay, so some sort of mystic guru. Billy Corgan's asking him, and he said it was only post Timothy Leary, after the time that he spent with Timothy Leary, that he actually looked at himself as some sort of mystic visionary. And this is really the archetype that they're trying to develop, the Jim Morrison type, right? These are far more influential on society. So welcome to the History of Propaganda, where we predict the future by telling the past. And we're going to tell this one in the larger concept of cause and effect, because this is we're going to get into the cybernetics revolution, the Future Perfect Part 2 article, and it's all about cause and effect. This is the very basis of social sciences. Stimulus response or stimulus react, and it's up to us to put a think in there. They can poke us and try to fish us, but if we're thinking, that interrupts their entire agenda. Okay, so we're going to get into all of those things right now. And so some of the latest research I've been doing as well is brand new, and we're connecting this social science research of the human being and the social contract theory all the way back to Moses Dabrushka now, through Comte, through Henri de Saint-Simon, through, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and all of these more modern, on this side of the French Revolution, social theorists. So I want to just quickly go through this book of Dabrushka's, the first few pages, and we're going to talk about how this actually is the origins of social science here in the West. So you should be looking at Silvana Greco's book, Moses Dabrushka and the Invention of Social Philosophy. See if I can full screen this so we can get in there a little bit. Yeah, so we'll take some excerpts out of here, but this is really what we're finding, is that Comte gets all of his ideas. The guy that we think who is the founder of sociology, social philosophy, social science, actually gets a lot of his material and his ideologies from this Moses Dobrushka, a generation prior. But because of Dobrushka's reputation, nobody cites him. And so this is Silvana Greco's whole point in this book here, is that, you know, a lot of our social sciences actually are owed to Moses Dobrushka, not Auguste Comte. Okay, so on page 2. On page 2, we see some of the earliest conversations about the pursuit of happiness. So this is 1700s. And so it's the same thing that Thomas Jefferson was talking about, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay. But prior to that, one of the founders of liberalism, John Locke, talked about life, liberty, and property as central to a sovereign individual, a rugged individual. And so you can see that they removed personal property and put the pursuit of happiness in there. They're literally changing the subject. We got a subject and a predicate in our sentences. They took the subject out and put a new one in. And so now our main focus since then has been the pursuit of happiness. Dobrushka is one of the key guys talking about this. Okay, he talks about a universal constitution. This is one of the first ever times that somebody's talking about constitutions, but on a universal level, encompassing the entire world. Kant, men like them have discussed this and talked about it, but this is the first time that we see in history, or at least recorded human history, where somebody's connecting Enlightenment thought and the scientific governance of society with a universal constitution. And when you look at the 1848 revolutions in Europe, they all culminate in a constitution. And I think this is the main goal, because they wanted to create from all of these various monarchies that spread through Europe, they wanted to sort of distill it even further to get nationalisms and to connect more disparate groups of ethnic people within a border. And then they were going to call that nationalism. And then from this step of nationalism, they were going to then, when ready, discard the constitutions and then integrate it into this overall overarching universal constitution, or what we know today as a new world order, or internationalism, globalism, this push to connect us all. It's a small world after all. So he called for a new democratic society born from the ashes of the French Revolution. And this is really where the social change comes from, and this idea of social science and the scientific governance of society. This was the answer to monarchical reign. And it's really based in this time in the 1700s. So when we think of civil rights, social justice warriors, Karens, right, progressive, woke culture, we're seeing that it's not necessarily cultural Marxism or the Marxists. They have borrowed from Dobrushka. Okay. So the first part of the Constitution talks about, right here, the first part of the Constitution will be on cause and effect. They want to look at human behavior and analyze it from a perspective of cause and effect. And the second part is about administering some of the decisions that they make from looking at that information, the first half of the Universal Constitution, and then applying it through legislation. moving assemblies, representatives, elected representatives, institutions into a new social structure. And this is the basis of social science, the feedback loop. They're going to gather information through analyzing cause and effect, and then they're going to take that information and apply it. So we're looking at the origins of social science research and then applied science. And ultimately, what we're looking at is the Lewis Brandeis brief. This is exactly how the Brandeis brief works. It identifies an injustice, demands redress. And how do they make it real and lasting? But legislation to influence your elected representatives, assemblies, institutions and organizations and corporations. This is exactly how Brandeis does it. And so Dobrushka is a second cousin to Jacob Frank. This is the key connection we want to make, is that this first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court justice, his background and his familial lineage goes right back to leaders of the French Revolution. And what are they purporting and pushing but liberalism, equality, fraternity, right? And so we see this being applied in the early 20th century with the progressive movement. And Brandeis is at the tip of the spear. So he's analyzing, this is page 3 now. He's analyzing society. He's analyzing social phenomenon according to laws and effect, following natural sciences. So he's trying to create in the minds of everybody, he's trying to validate or legitimize soft sciences and make them as trustable, legitimate as our hard sciences, physics, mathematics. And so he's applying mathematics and numbers to the human being in the 1700s. Okay. So this is the precursor to Henri de Saint-Simon, the utopian socialist movement. Comte, the founder of sociology and social science research is one of the major aspects of the New World Order. This is how, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory moves into Columbia University and becomes the new school for social science research. It's the new university. This is all how they came into America and infiltrated, was through the use of this critical theory. And this is, we can see at the very turn of the 20th century, the importance of the political salon, the House of Truth, and that they flipped the definition of liberalism into what they needed. So we've been in a very similar move as was happening in the French revolutions just over the 20th century. We called it the progressive era, and we are still under their thumb today because nobody recognizes this. Okay, so comes from the idea that Dobrushka was convinced that social reality could be known through an empirical descriptive method based on observations, faith in causality, comparative of each society, historical analysis. They could start to figure out how to best organize a new social structure in which to limit suffering and maximize happiness. So it's a great lesson in how progressive, or how our, the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. So he called for the social disorganization of society first through radical change, transformation from one order to the other, social reorganization on new cultural bases. And he's citing Jean-Jacques Rousseau as a savant. And they delve deep into the psychological aspects of change. To disorganize the old order of things. We're going back to the New Freedom literature where they talked about the old order changeth. It's the same people. This is Brandeis's presidential platform, New Freedom. Changes everything, 1913. This is the year that the Fed has created the FTC, surveillance, all of it. So it is really in Dobrushka's three phases of development of human order, theological to metaphysical to revolutionary, is where it parallels with Comte. And so when you see that this guy's around a generation before Comte, you can no longer say that Comte is the founder of social sciences and sociology. It's this lesser known Jacobin, probably a Jesuit, Freemason, and most likely a member of the Illuminati, most certainly a Frankist. At the basis of our social science field, which is one of the most influential ways to socially engineer the human being this side of law. And they're both related. So I just wanted to show you that there is some deep context here historically. So we're going to get into the Josiah Macy Foundation. This is the origins of the cybernetic revolution. We'll introduce you to some people, to some main concepts, and then I'm going to go through the article, Future Perfect, the cybernetic revolution. Okay, so we're going to get into actually, first, what I want to show you is sort of a meta image. Give me a moment. We're going to try to do this linearly, give you a sort of a concept image, and then it'll help you see as we get into the more detailed information here. So you should be looking at a map of cybernetics. So you can see the time is going across the bottom from left to right. So on the far left, we can see that Vannevar Bush is here. And so this is one of the founders of the S1 project. This is the one of the founders of the Manhattan Project. Let me see if I can do this. Can I do this and then zoom in? Yes, there we go. Okay, so the social graph of cybernetics you should be looking at. Let me just double check. Yes. So far, so good. So you can see Vannevar Bush, he's a member of the Century Club. He is Bohemian Club. I got pictures of all of those guys hanging out at the Bohemian Club. You can see they're directly influencing the major names in first phase cybernetics or first order or first wave cybernetics. This is this early pioneering group from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that turned into the second wave in the 50s and 60s and 70s under Stafford Beer here. You see Marshall McLuhan, key. Buckminster Fuller, Bertrand Russell, Arturo Rosenbluth from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So this is straight out of Boston, direct affiliations with Harvard for certain. You can see from left to right as time goes on, Gregory Bateson here and Margaret Mead, husband and wife. You can see Norbert Wiener, and then all of the strings that come off of him. We go through Ross Ashby, who we're going to get into, eventually into Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth Catalog. Oh, there gives me an opportunity. Do I dare? This is being recorded. Probably not a good idea. Oh, yeah. So I found this at a bookstore here in Kelowna. Stuart Brand is known for the Whole Earth Catalog. So this is what a Whole Earth Catalog looks like. It's actually pretty big. And they say that this is really the first internet. It was their first shot at the internet. These were very popular in the day. The last Whole Earth Catalog, probably worth some money. And look at the future perfect aspect on the back. We can't put it together. It is together. Future perfect. Look at it. Look at how perfect we look. So that's a major piece of literature. Very important. The Whole Earth Catalog, the first internet. So back to this map. Should be looking at this map again. Ross Ashby in the middle. Yes, you are. Okay. See Ken Kesey, Merry Pranksters. The author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We're going to show you the hospital that inspired all of that. Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary considered himself the new Aleister Crowley. The spider. There he is. Okay, and then into our modern day. So I just want to show you that, this is all connected, all of these names that we're going to go through today. And let's give you a sort of a mind map a little bit as we go through all of these personalities. You're going to be able to sort of place them in this time map. Okay. So you can see that each color represents sort of different roles. We saw in the MK Ultra videos that they all openly knew that they each played roles. So there's designers and architects. There's design theorists and critics. There's computer pioneers, and then counterculture leaders in purple. You can see that they all played their role in persuading compliance, persuading public opinion, and they employ all measures. As we've seen in the MK Ultra video, they combine legitimate research with as far out there social gurus and social influencers as possible. And they state that these guys that get out there on the fringes, as far as they can push, gives the clinicians all of that room behind them to research legitimately. Okay. And I'll show you one more map here. Should be looking at it's like a flower, cybernetics flower. And so this is just another piece of provenance I've pulled off the net. There's no real source, I don't think, for it, but it just shows you that all of these names are all recognized as key members within the cybernetics revolution. Paul Felix Lazarsfeld, two-step flow of communication, one-step flow of communication. He's the guy at the head of Princeton Radio Research Project, the War of the Worlds broadcast. They're testing you. We all live in an experiment. You're going to totally understand that by the end of this show. So Hutchinson, we got Tuber, Hans Lucas Tuber. Some of these names are going to be coming back over and over. There's Gregory Bateson. Get into him in a moment. He's one of the key guys. You can see Frank Fremont Smith is the head of the Macy Foundation meetings. And here's Margaret Mead, Gregory Bateson's wife. Gender roles. Talking about Tavistock, and there's a major connection here between the Macy Conferences and Tavistock that we're going to get into. So it's a little bit of a difficult diagram to find on the internet in such high quality. I had to piece this one together too. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to zoom in and get all that detail. But I encourage you to go find it. It fills in basically the entire story in an interesting aesthetic way. So, because most of us are visionary, or we see things visually, those things tend to help. Okay, so that's the meta image. We've gone over MIT, Vannevar Bush, Rosenbluth, connection to Harvard. And then, so I want to show you the original image on this book, The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics and Society, Norbert Wiener. He is the founder of cybernetics, really. He's the one that coins the term. Okay, we're talking feedback loops. He's one of the behavioral feedback loop is one of three major inventions or creations that come out of these cybernetic meetings. And so here is a picture from the original book, just to give you an idea what they're thinking when they think cybernetics. humans inside of a gear or a wheel. This is why I referred to the gear looking thing in the carousel of progress at Disneyland. Interestingly enough, those two men are working against each other. When you look at it, how the gears are lined up, they're going to go nowhere if they're going to be aligned like that. Okay, that's that. So we're going to get into the who, what, why, where, or when. So we know the how on all of this now. And we'll start here with the Josiah Macy Conferences. What are we looking at now? Do you know? It's the map. One moment. Okay, so we'll get into some actual primary source material here to explain the story of the Macy Conferences and how they are connected to MK Ultra directly. So the Josiah Macy Conferences really start in the 1930s. You can see there, 1930 to 1955. And actually, I got to start here. The history of the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation. Okay, so this is from their own mouths, which they talk about the origins of and the reasons for their foundation. So there is Josiah Macy Jr. Okay. And then Kate Macy Ladd is another key person here. And she's really close to the Rockefellers, Carnegies. And so we see an intermingling of all of these foundations, and Russell Sage and the Macy Foundation a key, especially when we're talking the topic of social science research. Okay. So in launching the Macy Foundation, Kate Macy Ladd was part of an important and uniquely American phenomenon of wealthy families giving back by establishing philanthropic efforts with a social mission in perpetuity. Andrew Carnegie laid out the philosophical basis for this in his Gospel of Wealth essay in 1889, in which he called on the wealthy to become stewards and to invest in future generations. In the first 4 decades of the 20th century, family wealth created many notable foundations that are still in existence. Among the families that established foundations were Carnegie, Rockefeller, Harkness, Kellogg, Sloan, today's Sloan Kettering, Ford, and about 1,000 other ones, but these are the major ones. They really keyed in on social science at the turn of the century. They figured out through their work with Wilhelm Wundt, the first psychiatrists, the first foreigners ever to receive PhDs out of Prussia. This is what they were establishing in the last half of the 18th or the 19th century in the 1800s. See, once they turned into the 19th century, they'd figured out quite a bit. And it's really since these Macy meetings and MK Ultra especially that they'd really figured out as much as they needed to. And now it's really just about applying all this information over and over and over now. And here we are nearly 100 years later, and there's really no visible authority to our world, especially when we're on social media. We just are steered and directed to act properly. And if we don't, we get demonetized. The algorithms, right? What really happens here is what we see. Brandeis get rid of courts of law, switch it to administrative law. And now we're seeing Musk say the administrative aspect that Brandeis put in is outdated and has to go. And what's going to be imposed now under the same rhetoric and crisis government as was 100 years ago, a digital version of administrative government. And we're all ruled now, instead of by laws or bylaws, we're now really steered, ruled, directed by algorithms. And I think here's a picture of her. You see her. That's what these nice people look like. People that damn the future. They're all the nicest looking anti-war non-interventionalists. Okay. Let's see if I can find now what I was supposed to show here. I think it's page 36. Yeah, Frank Fremont Smith and the Macy Conference program. So Frank Fremont Smith, we're going to get into here momentarily, but just for now, all that needs to be known is he's the head of it. And it's actually coming right out of the Second World War, which is what we saw there on that mind map in the upper far left. We saw Vannevar Bush, and he is, the face of the Manhattan Project, and this is where they were trying to create the atomic bomb. So they discovered the feedback loop for war purposes and consciously decided that they were going to use that to start steering society. This is literally what they thought. And so coming out of the Second World War, as you'll see, they started looking at ways to keep us all in fear. And the Cold War was the first thing that comes out of post-World War II. And I'll show you, it's all a psychological operation. There was never any reality or truth to any of it. As I've actually shown you in the past, even, George Kennan, he's the famous writer of Article X. Containment of Russia is all his theory. This is existential threat. Russia as an existential threat. This is just an old, really tired trope that keeps everybody in fear and allows them to continue to move society forward at their heart's desire. Okay. So they bring up the Macy Conferences here. Sponsored conferences on topics such as the nascent field of cybernetics. So this is the very beginnings of cybernetics, is held at these Macy conferences. They're held biannually from 46 to 53, but there's actually meetings there we're going to show you from 42 on. So there's 4 years that aren't really recorded. And they're not even in the book that I have. My book starts from 46 to 50 and covers to 53 as well. So the Macy Conferences on Cybernetics best reflected the Foundation's conviction in organizing interdisciplinary conferences as platforms for advancing knowledge. So this is really where the inquiry starts, a generation prior, because, they're these first scholarly social scientists. They're unelected. They're outside the public purview. And it's the first sort of interdisciplinary gathering of experts outside of the administration of a president. And they're all based and focused on social science, social injustice, equity. And so as I've shown now, this whole idea of equity and sort of progressive thought goes all the way back to Dobrushka, Montesquieu, past Comte, Henri Saint-Simon. And so we're going to show how this all comes from crisis government. This is why I started a series on YouTube called From the Embers of War, because this is really where every piece of advanced technology comes from. Our pursuit of control of others or the murder of others underneath the fake slogan of making the world safe for democracy. I mean, this has gone on for over 100 years. We're seeing that the progressives are largely leveraged. I mean, the US State Department is one of the largest employers in the world. So it's pretty tough to be anti-war when that puts food on the table for you and your children. You can see that they're leveraged, and this was on purpose. They've done this deliberately to stop flack. Okay, so we'll show you how, once again, that all comes from crisis government. And when they have you in fear, they can move in longer strides, taking bigger steps. Okay, so let's get into Frank Fremont Smith and the Macy Conferences now. Okay, so this is the origins of cybernetics. You can see right away immediately, Frank Fremont Smith's a name that's there. Okay. Now a quick jump into Frank Fremont Smith. Let me just make sure you're looking at the same thing I am. Yeah. And now can I just click on that? We can go to Frank Fremont Smith. And you're going to see that. Looks like you did. So you can see here, he was an American administrator, executive with the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, and president of British General Rees's World Federation of Mental Health, known together with Lawrence K. Frank as motivators of the Macy Conferences. So this is John Rawlings Rees, who is the founder of Tavistock. Okay. Him and Frank Fremont Smith are very close friends. This is where we see the crossover between Tavistock, British MI6, with US intelligence and the cybernetic revolution and MK Ultra. So there's a British American contingent, and this is why it's far easier to see Aldous Huxley's involvement and direction when you understand that MK Ultra wasn't just necessarily exclusively an American thing. This is a joint effort by the British and Americans. Okay, so we'll go back to the Macy Conferences here. And so some of the first that were ever there was Gregory Bateson and his wife, Margaret Mead, and they were really the organizers. They were recruiting in much the same way that James T. Shotwell, Herbert Crowley, and Louis Brandeis were doing for the inquiry a generation prior, in sort of setting the foundations of all of this. So you see Gregory Bateson, some other key names there, Lawrence Kuby, Warren McCulloch, Arturo Rosenbluth. We've seen some of those names already. And so what was the first meetings? These are the 1942 meetings that are off the record. What was the first meetings entitled? Cerebral Inhibition. Okay, and the first two topics here, and this is legit, I can pull it out of the book: hypnotism and conditioned reflex. Okay, we talk cause and effect, stimulus, think, respond, or how they want you, stimulus, react. So here it is where they're trying to figure out scientific axioms that they can now sort of apply across the entire nation to influence, to persuade as many human beings at once as possible. Okay. And so their fundamental aspects of health and sickness is how this was promoted. And today you can see that it's really well beyond its original stated goals. So Frank Fremont Smith, Macy Conferences, physiological mechanisms underlying the phenomena of conditioned reflexes and hypnosis as related to the problem of cerebral inhibition. These are the very first meetings of MK Ultra. essentially. You can look at it that way. And so, can I go back here and go to page 20? Let's see if they say that here. Yeah, and this guy here is there when they sort of start. Ludwig Cast, this guy here. So the first meeting's on the feedback loop, feedback mechanisms. Okay. And so now we'll show you where, because we're going to do the who, what, why, where, when as best as possible. See if I can make this happen. So this is Langley Porter Psychiatry Hospital, Psychiatric Hospital. And so this is where, are you guys actually seeing that? That's actually my paint for some reason. Yeah. So that's in 2017. This is where Bateson originally worked out of in 1942. And we're going to talk about that in a sec here. Hang on. Let me find this. That's okay. Let's get into Gregory Bateson. He's a key guy. And through him, we'll explain a lot of this. So here's a picture of him, I think around this time, 1942, working out of Langley Porter Psychiatric Hospital in San Francisco. Okay, and here his team that he had. And I think they even called it the Bateson Project. And this is really the foundations of family psychiatry. So they're really targeted on the family and the psychiatric dynamics that go on in the family. See Bateson with his three key guys there. There's a picture of Bateson. And here's the cornerstone, at that time still visible. And there's the laying of the cornerstone. There is what it looked like in 2017. And here's what it looked like at the time. You can see that the design of the building is pretty easy to see. It's unique. This is the hospital that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is based on. Okay, just updated and colored. There's Bateson and Mead. Is that the cornerstone ceremony? A rising sun on the pulpit here. Just saying. Okay, let's see. Now, there's something else I want to leave this aspect here with, just to show you the ominous continuity that flows through familial connections. So this is his daughter. So you can see we've talked a little bit about, and we're going to get into this guy here, William. So William Bateson, we're going to get into, this is Gregory Bateson's father, who's involved in the creation or the founding of genetics, believe it or not. And that is his granddaughter, Nora, who's the founder now, pushing forward still the same ideas as her father and her grandfather. Award-winning filmmaker, writer, and educator, as well as president of the International Bateson Institute based in Sweden. Her work asks the question how we can improve our perception of the complexity we live within so we may improve our interaction with the world. Well, you can start by changing the word perception to perspective. See, they don't want you to really know what's going on at all. And they ensure, like Brandeis did with his law clerks, that their legacy and their ideology continues. Still pushing complexity as the reasons for radical social change. Here's Mary Catherine Bateson, is an anthropologist and writer. Looks a lot like her mother. Fulfilling the same role, same path. Nora is a writer, filmmaker, multimedia designer, member of the Club of Rome. Okay. Mm-hmm. I was going to show you Beekman Hotel. They all took place, all of these conferences took place at the Beekman Hotel in New York, except for the last one. Okay. So Frank Fremont Smith, Rawlings Reese, Friendship, Rockefeller Foundation. So Rockefeller's funding this organization that's run by John Rawlings Reese, the founder of Tavistock, called the World Federation of Mental Health. Okay, now the key is to understand mental health as national morale. Because where does Bateson get his start but the Committee for National Morale? A moment. Just have a quick boo at this. Where it went. So the Committee for National Morale is where Gregory Bateson gets his start, and that should be what you're looking at now. Yes. So let's just talk our way through this one. The Committee for National Morale was a United States presidential advisory committee for the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt, organized to analyze the nation's overall morale during World War II, study propaganda efforts by the Axis powers, and recommend appropriate strategies in response. Members included notable journalists, anthropologists, psychologists, including George Gallup, Margaret Mead, Gordon Alpert, Hadley Cantrell. That is the War of the Worlds broadcast. He wrote a book on it. Eric Fromm, critical theorist coming from Frankfurt. Okay. So you can see that there is this committee founded in 1940, led by Arthur Upham Pope, a curator of Persian art. One of the topics the committee debated was the formation of a nationwide domestic propaganda agency comparable to the ministry headed by Joseph Goebbels. So here's a great example of why polls are completely misunderstood in the world today. Polls are really not meant as an indicator of public opinion, but a shaper of it. So we kind of misunderstand the whole reason behind polls. They're actually there to persuade you into thinking things. They're not there to figure out what you're thinking. So this guy that comes from the Committee for National Morale is really the architect of Silicon Valley. So we need to start looking at these things as morale builders. This really will help you see that there's a even larger game going on here. So the Bateson Project, founders of family therapy, comes out of Menlo Park for Veterans Hospital in Palo Alto. We saw what the building looked like in 2017. I'll show you what it looks like now. This is actually quite interesting here. Just to show you how progress works. Here is from Google Maps what that looks like today. Okay, so we can come out this far onto the street. We can see from the pictures that I showed you earlier that the color is right and that building is there. But if we step out onto the road, you can see that it is gone and it's construction there. They are building a new building there. So in the spirit of the men who stare at goats and being able to pass through physical objects, we can do that here. You can see that Google car hasn't gone up here. So all of this building that was there still remains on Google Maps, but you got to sneak in the back alley. See that it's the same building. So this is sort of this is where Bateson really gets his start working out of this morale building. So they're trying to figure out ways to keep or to steer morale, whether good or bad, positive or negative. Okay. When we think of propaganda, we think of the mainstream media, we think of pop music, all of it collectively is meant to steer morale, national morale, most importantly. Okay. The general health of society, polls aren't indicators of public opinion, they are shapers of it. Tools used to shape national morale. So mainstream media, newspapers, television, radio, satellite radio, social media, polls, all of it in its entirety as all-encompassing mass communication is meant to keep national morale where they want it. So we can't be looking at polls as evidence supporting or not supporting or objecting to our worldview. We got to understand that they are shapers of public opinion. There's very little truth behind any of it. And Gallup is working with Edward Bernays. So everything is scripted, packaged, broadcast, channeled, and implanted into your brain 100% of the time. And only from a mediated world would we suffer from psychosis, not understanding what is real and what is fantasy. Only when we live in a deeply mediated world would we run into such a contradiction. If we kept our feet and our head in reality at all times, we would never have to worry about that, would we? This is why I go in the summer and I dedicate myself to farming. Keeps my feet in the soil, keeps my head in the right space, and why I do this in the fall. So the things that you think are legitimate and validate your world are generally the very things that are keeping it hidden from you. This is the matrix. Okay. So before we get into this article, I just wanted to say one last thing here is that the culmination of this cybernetics thing was they combined they found three key aspects: information theory, systems theory, and behavioral science. And they combined all three of them and called it cybernetics. So information theory is Claude Shannon and his little mouse. Systems theory about how to direct the individual within a greater systems, and then the behavioral feedback and the feedback loop to understand how to stimulate to get how to cause to get the proper effect, from which then they could analyze and apply the differences, much like you're shooting down a plane flying through the air. So a couple other things here. See what you guys are looking at. You guys are still looking at that, so we'll stop this share. Make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so Gregory Bateson, 19. Uh, I wanted here somewhere. 1940s. He's working out of this psychiatric hospital in San Francisco. So Bateson's uh, central to the Macy Conferences on Cybernetics. His early work on feedback loops, information learning, and self-regulating systems. And these ideas fed directly into computer science, AI research, network theory, organizational design. And so this all comes from the inquiry's work, Brandeis. And so you can start to see that there's this ominous continuity that goes from the turn of the 20th century into the middle part of that century, 50s and 60s, where this cybernetics group takes over. Okay, so Bateson sits at a crucial crossroads between counterculture and computation. He's a half clinician and half Timothy Leary. And their influence directly feeds into Stuart Brand, the Whole Earth catalog, the rest of the cybernetics. He was one of the first, like Lippmann was one of the first of the inquiry. We see Bateman as one of the first guys looking into all of this. Okay, so let's get into this second article, Future Perfect Part 2. I'll start to go through these names and how it all actually happened. Okay, so should be looking at the Future Perfect Part 2, and here we see Margaret Mead, McCulloch. So I think we got this far on the last episode, and hopefully the visuals continue to go and they don't black out, because it's far easier to understand this history when we see the pictures and individuals and put names to faces. Okay, so a direct quote from Edward Bernays, 1928. So this is prior to that, showing that even back in the as early as the 1910s, we're seeing this push towards controlling society and what they think. So the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. And that is the very first thing he says. I mean, he literally writes the book on propaganda. That's why he is one of the key guys in the logo of the history of propaganda. He's the father of propaganda, double nephew of Sigmund Freud. Here's his book of propaganda. He literally wrote the book on it. See on the cover, The Public Mind in the Making. And here is a screenshot from the page that shows you that that is the very first thing he says. Chapter 1, Organizing Chaos. Hopefully now you're starting to see some patterns in even the language that they're using. Organizing chaos. So it'd be reasonable then to conclude, because Bernays is not speaking of those at the podium, that any investigation into the true ruling power of our country would necessarily begin with those holding most intimate counsel of our elected officials while managing to remain outside the spotlight. Right? Lobbyists, special advisors, this idea of cameralism brought from the 1700s, Sweden and Prussia, all the way to America. The Bernays admission offered above is taken from the very first chapter. Shows the complicit involvement in the social engineering of Western society. So just as the primary motive of any foreign diplomat or central intelligence operative or political corporate lobbyist is to get as close to the decision makers as possible, that is where we find Bernays. He is in the inner circles of propaganda, the founding of propaganda in the United States, lead up to the First World War. He's key contributor to the Committee on Public Information. So here, and we complete this two-part investigation, Future Perfect series. So less than 6 months after returning from the peace conference in Paris, Bernays founded one of the very first public relations businesses in New York and taught the very first public relations courses at New York University. Same place Mark Crispin Miller educates on the same topic today, by the way. Just some provenance here showing we're legit. The Council on Public Relations opened its doors at 19 East 48th Street in late 1919. Signifying a landmark moment in modern American information history, the moment when the power of propaganda was realized, turned inward, and used as a weapon meant to steer public opinion deliberately and shape Western society to their heart's desire. Bernays stating in several interviews that if you could use propaganda for war, you could certainly use it for peace. Ideas were weapons even more effective than bullets. And it is precisely this weaponized peacetime propaganda program, initiated from the embers of the First World War, that is of particular interest to us at the History of Propaganda. And both Lippmann and Bernays are of specific interest, as both are intimately involved in the ultimate writing and promotion of Wilson's 14 points. Moving to the League of Nations, and we've gone through that in part one. It's not really Wilson's, is it, yet? If you were to ask anybody even today, they'd say that Woodrow Wilson wrote the 14 points. No, Sidney Webb, Fabian, hitting you over the head with a hammer. So today, nearly exactly 100 years since the publications of both Public Opinion and Crystallizing Public Opinion, both Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays respectively are considered two founding fathers of spin. And it is upon the backs of these two monumental figures of mass communication that was established both the engineering of consent and the technic political philosopher as an entering wedge. These are two main aspects of cybernetics. So no historian alive or dead dare disagree that both Lippmann and Bernays left behind colossal jackboot prints on the Western post-World War psyche. They did it twice or more. You want to look at the propaganda campaign that was behind the 1954 Guatemalan coup d'etat? Want to put a face to that? Here it is right here. Edward Bernays starts on Broadway pushing social taboos and pushing sort of sketchy storylines. Finishes up his career working directly for the US government and covering over global coup d'etats because of the United Fruit Company. So some more information on Lippmann that we've gone over time and time before. But this phrase here is important, and I will say it every time that I can. Our time, of course, believes in change. The adjective progressive is what we like, and the word new, be it in the new nationalism of Roosevelt, the new freedom of Wilson, or the new socialism of the syndicalists, Changing the World, The Social Republic by Alan Dawley, and that actually comes from Walter Lippmann's Liberty and the News, I believe. I could pull that up right now. So Lippmann placed himself as a social wedge between the private citizen and the vast environment in which he is entangled. That's from Public Opinion, page 157, I think. Lippmann, for 60 years, became the archetype for all kinds of model American leaning shoulders, and it is imperative more than now than ever to understand Lippmann's influence on today's media. Lippmann laid the foundation for the political philosopher, a form of expertness. And men like Noam Chomsky, or contemporary members of the intellectual dark web like Jordan Peterson owe greatly to Lippmann's early 20th century path clearing effort. So Joe Rogan, these are our modern, you want to talk social influencers, this is the guy that really starts all that. That's two-step flow of communication straight out of Lazarsfeld. Bateson's talking about it too. Using celebrity to spread information to persuade. This is the delicate art of persuasion. This is why I have the subtitle, The History of Propaganda, as the delicate art of persuasion, because that is what we're exposing here. One of the key guys. So the first modern day experts, they fit all proper and necessary criteria that fulfill the definitions put forth by Bernays. This unseen group of men that we never know, I'm showing you them now. We're just going to try to make them household names. We see these same organizations being named again: Carnegie, Russell Sage, Rockefeller, Social Science Research Council, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, Rockefeller Brothers Fund. These are all named in this book, Foundations by Renee Wormser, to show that they all had interlocking directorates and cross-pollination all over the place between different corporations, organizations, and even the government. We've gone into Russell Sage. See the beehive, really trying to create a hive mind. Improvement of social and living conditions. Russell Sage is behind a lot of Brandeis's work, as we've shown. A lot of radical social reform has been paid for by Russell Sage. So the cybernetic revolution and Gregory Bateson, as I begin to think about what I have seen of history in my life, it seems to me that I had really only seen two moments that would rate as really important from an anthropologist's point of view. One was the events leading up to the Treaty of Versailles, and the other was the cybernetic breakthrough. This is from Gregory Bateson's Two Worlds Symposium speech, in which he also states that the Treaty of Versailles is the greatest sellout in human history. So Gregory Bateson was one of 20 invitees to the very first Macy Conferences in 42, as we've shown, and is today considered one of the founders of cybernetics. He's really considered an architect of Silicon Valley because of the philosophical, intellectual approach to it all. He's living in Palo Alto. Bateson seemed destined from birth to be among the pioneers of biological control systems, having been named after the founder of genetics, Gregor Mendel. Bateson, the inventor of the double-blind dilemma, describing the paralyzing effect one experiences when inundated with conflicting information of similar phenomenon to what fellow Macy attendee Paul Lazarsfeld would later famously coin narcotizing dysfunction. See, Rockefeller-funded Princeton Radio Research Project. Already mentioned a couple times here. You can see that these interdisciplinary meetings start to provide fruit, bear fruit, and that we're seeing ideas being understood from different perspectives and then applied from those perspectives. So Bateson, along with his wife Margaret Mead and Lawrence K. Frank, represented the social science cluster and were responsible for guiding the selection of representatives of the human sciences for the conferences. So there they are, recruiting. This is straight out of the Cybernetics book that I've shown a few times. Right here, this one. Okay, in which hypnosis is cited 66 times, reflex 71, 213 for condition. 168 times they mention Bateson, and 560 times they mention McCullough. So you can really determine who's leading these meetings, whose information is really being the most influential there. So Bateson even founding the practice of family therapy through the Bateson Project, and its subsequent groundbreaking study entitled Toward a Theory of Schizophrenia. We see a lot of mental health promotion today. This is really where it comes out of. And what it really is about national morale. So among themselves, it was known as the Man-Machine Project. And together it represented the next phase of research and development into what the founder of Cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, subtitled in his groundbreaking book, Cybernetics, the control and communication in the animal and machine. There's no man there, no human. Notice that. They're applying what they find in the animal onto the human in a project called Man-Machine Project. So prior to being known officially as the Macy Conferences, the meetings were ominously titled the Cerebral Inhibition Meetings, and the first two presentations focused on hypnotism and conditioned reflex. And it was all made possible through the Josiah Macy Foundation and the British social hygiene organ, the World Federation of Mental Health. This is the connection here. Frank Fremont Smith, as the medical director and executive secretary of the Macy Foundation and the president of the World Federation of Mental Health, acted as a liaison between British and American social science programs. This is MI6, US intelligence interacting here. So this most pretentious of looking men here, John Rawlings Rees with the pipe. Okay, this is Rockefeller money funded all of this, including the origins of Tavistock, through World Federation for Mental Health, think national morale. So for those following along, the World Federation of Mental Health, founded by John Rawlings Rees, founder also 1 year earlier with the help, once again, of Rockefeller funds of the infamous Tavistock Institute in London, an organization created to promote Freudian psychoanalytics. This is where we see the connection between the early British pursuit of cybernetics through the Ratio Club, involving Alan Turing, W. Ross Ashby, Horace Barlow, John Bates, with the American cybernetic group we resume our description of below. So another founding cybernetician, Norbert Wiener, was a child protege and polymath, making national headlines as the most remarkable boy in the world. Norbert graduated high school at 11 and university with a master's of arts in mathematics at 14. He graduated Harvard at 17 with a PhD. He studied philosophy at Cornell and philosophy under Bertrand Russell at Cambridge. His early life seemingly predetermined by his demanding father, Leo Wiener, who just so happens to be the first ever professor of Slavic cultures at Harvard and amazingly an initial member of the Inquiry. The Inquiry was originally made up of 150 or more, and our buddy here, Norbert Wiener's father, was one of them. Leo's expertise on Slavic cultures of obvious interest to the Inquiry intelligence chiefs, in that much of their preparatory work involved Central Europe and the Slavic people right in the middle, historically serving as a strategic geopolitical buffer between Russia and the West. They're actually key in the Baltic and Balkan regions to the north and south. Leo was famously accused publicly of the overbearing nature with which he trained Norbert. The Wieners apparently direct descendants of Moses ben Maimon Rambam, more commonly known as the most influential of all Torah scholars, Maimonides. So this means that at the same time his father was assisting the Inquiry and teaching Slavic cultural studies at Harvard, young Norbert was himself teaching at Harvard as a postgrad, splitting his time between Harvard and the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where he would found anti-aircraft technology for the US military. And it is through this military work he discovered the behavioral feedback loop. So the link between Leo, the father of the founder of cybernetics, and the Inquiry, showing an ominous continuity between two organizations we had previously thought were separated by decades. Norbert and his father deeply involved within the burgeoning networks of US intelligence, and it certainly seems as though Norbert was groomed to continue his father's pioneering work, doesn't it? A more important link connecting the Inquiry and the cybernetician movement may not exist. However, it is over the remaining body of this article. The author makes two more attempts at doing that, starting with this guy, previously mentioned, William Bateson applied Gregor Mendel's work to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and coined the term genetics for a new biological discipline. Samantha Hauserman, Arizona State University. So William Bateson, the father of Gregory, a fellow of the Royal Society and the first to use the word genetics. He's the founder of the Journal of Genetics in 1910 and the Genetics Society in 1919. The founder of the two necessary pillars of propaganda, information and institution. You need a place to congregate and a place to propagate, right? You're going to gather like in the Century Club or the Cosmo Club or the Council on Foreign Relations, and you're going to gather all of your ideas together, and you're going to put them together into an article or a composition of some sort, and then disseminate that to all of your members. Gregory Bateson's father, William, besides coining the term for the entire future of the discipline, founded both the place to congregate and a place to propagate. It looks to us as if William Bateson, with his combative, forceful personality, was to Gregor Mendel what Thomas Henry Huxley was to Charles Darwin. He was literally Mendel's bulldog. This is what they called him. And they needed to give it the theory of evolution, which is still considered a theory of evolution, backbone. So as president of the John Innes Horticultural Society, William Bateson was afforded a prominent and influential position in which to propagate Mendelian heredity. This is what genetics was originally called. Bateson's contribution to genetics, so immense, in fact, some historians consider Bateson himself to be the very founder. William Bateson translated Mendel's work into English and was the master of ceremonies at the very influential Third International Conference on Genetics in 1906. These meetings established genetics. It's the first time the term was used. William's son Gregory, whom was named after Gregor Mendel, was only 2 years old at the time. It is at these 1906 meetings that the study of heredity becomes genetics. It's right here. And an entire scientific discipline meant to give Darwin's theory of evolution some backbone was created. And guess who was there? Lionel de Rothschild was the most gracious of hosts, accepting achievement awards while also donating his land for the meetings, much like the Paris Peace Conferences were all done on Rothschild land. Admitted, documented history. So it is at the Beekman Hotel in New York that the Brits teamed with men like the inventor of the artificial neuron, Warren McCulloch, and Arturo Rosenbluth, a leading figure in the understanding of homeostasis, or the condition of optimal physical and chemical functioning for any living organism, including the metabolic processes, the nervous system, and the motor function. So the ideal functioning ability of the human being is what they're looking for. Makes one look at a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, perhaps for the very first time. Much like polls. There's a reverse definition that none of us are really aware of. But these are the reasons why these things were created in the first place. Television isn't for your entertainment, it's for your entrainment. It's to monitor, manage, and maintain national morale. It's a great word to use in the place of propaganda, national morale. So Lawrence K. Frank, holding the proverbial BA, this time from Columbia, and director of the Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial from 23 to 29, and director of the Child Development Program at Rockefeller Foundation. Other invitees included author of Patterns of Sexual Behavior, Frank Ambrose Beach Jr., longtime personal friend of Walter Lippmann, Carl Binger, and Lawrence Kuby. Carl Binger graduated Harvard around the same time as Lippmann. They are long friends by this time, hanging out at Greenwich Village in New York. Okay, so here is Warren McCulloch, this guy that figured out first how you think. That's him right there. He looks like he has your best interests at heart. Come on. So for the first time in the history of science, we know how we know. Warren McCulloch. To know how we know, an early milestone on the singularity journey that both confirmed a human use of human beings and a launching point for the information age. Wiener was instrumental in the founding of anti-aircraft technology for the military, and through this research discovered that just as remotely guided missiles rely on constant feedback of information in order to remain on target, so too the feedback loop could be used to adjust the attitude and direction of human behavior within the larger society. So I refer back to the Changing Images of Man study in this picture that we showed about motivations and values values on the bottom leading to motivations, leading to actions, leading to the general health of society on the surface of the ocean. So if it's calm, you have a healthy society, but if it's wavy and stormy, there's probably situations going on prior to that that are more symptomatic. Again, cause and effect. This is really how these guys are looking at it. So instead of having a perception of what these guys are doing, take it from their perspective. So whoever wants to shoot down an airplane must be able to read the evasive tactics of his enemy and interpret this data in order to strike it in its future location. The magic word for all of this was, of course, prediction. And this goes back to predictive law. They're trying to predict you breaking law so they can stop it. From Minority Report, we've covered this. And the powers of prediction improve with an increased amount of data. Just as on a small scale, a cat jumps into the future of a mouse, or a missile is guided into the future of an enemy airplane, so it suddenly seemed conceivable on the grand scale of societies, economies, and politics to program conscious human targets that, so long as the appropriately oriented mechanisms of communication and control are in place, would always already have been met. The tense of cybernetics would thus be something like the future perfect. Everything will have been. That's from Heinz von Forster, page 2021, Cybernetics, the Macy Conferences, 1946-53. That is from the book that I just showed you, where he uses the term future perfect, unveiling, another subtle secret, which you can tell that our social engineers, they always talk in this future perfect tense. This is why we aren't allowed to question any of their ways and means, because the ends are already perfect. Founder of the information age, Claude Shannon and his mouse. So ever wonder why dystopian novels always begin after the calamity? A Brave New World and 1984 being perhaps the two most appropriate examples, only allude to the radical and uprooting events that led to its future dystopian setting. Both stories told in the future perfect tense. Everything will have been. The progressive ultimatum has slowly turned into a totalitarian nightmare, one step at a time. This article hopefully now drawing a common linear line of evidence showing some parallels and unveiling patterns for the reader. So interdisciplinary communication problems were overcome by a collective ethos, a pursuit of relationships based on the sharing of information rather than on any common language. Heinz von Forster claimed that from these meetings came no in-house jargon. Instead, the common currency of communication between fields of study was to experiment with a set of conceptual models which seem to be useful right across the board and which themselves provide a medium of communication also when shared. Because a lot of the verbiage and language that they're using in these interdisciplinary meetings conflict, or a lot of times these guys won't know what each other is discussing. So it took some time before they could create a language of their own. So a set of models was established based on three main elements, each of which derived from groundbreaking research conducted by Macy invitees in the 40s. Logical calculus of McCulloch and Pitts's artificial neuron model, Claude Shannon's information theory of propositions, and Wiener, Bigelow, and Rosenbluth's behavioral feedback models. Combining these three discoveries, another major step towards a meshing of man and machine through their commonly shared digital language. Once they knew how we thought and how best to encode the sender with new information, all they needed was Wiener's feedback loop to then control our behavior. This is the world that we were born into. So from Cybernetics, Klaus Pius, a universal theory of digital machines, a stochastic theory of the symbolic, and a non-deterministic yet teleological theory of feedback were combined at the Macy Conferences into a single theory that could then claim validity for living organisms as well as machines, for economic as well as psychological processes, and for sociological as well as aesthetic phenomena. So it's really, they're legitimizing it. Here's one of the diagrams from the picture. I added the word soma here because that is what that is. This is what they named soma after. You can see how they've calculated human behavior. I mean, it's just understand that they've gone deep, spent a lot of money to figure out how we think. And when they figured out how we thought, they celebrated. It was a foundational moment in our world of servitude today. So the new cognitive conception of man in terms of logical circuits made all three compatible to each other. The common precondition of these three foundational concepts of cybernetics: logical calculus, information theory, and feedback. So systems theory, information theory, and feedback loops. It is thus only when humans and machines operate on the same digital basis, when the knowledge of humans and that of machines can be made compatible, that the epistemology of cybernetics is itself able to be productive. Turing's universal machine as a model for the brains, employing Pitz's and McCulloch's calculus for activity in nervous nets. So the human beings who are integrated into these apparatuses must necessarily become different human beings. They will no longer fit the previous concept of what it means to be human. The mutation of humanity is a necessary accompaniment to the rise of apparatuses. There will be a transition into a new and fourth form of material organization. After the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms will come a kingdom in which the human, though admittedly playing a significant role in this transition, will perhaps only be participating in a phenomenon whose implications and consequences transcend him. There they are admitting that this is going beyond human now. Is he predicting the fourth industrial revolution or the Fourth Reich? So the cybernetics group had determined even before they began that for this theory of scientific management, first employed by Brandeis and Co., to gain a broader influence over Western society, they would first need to destabilize or dislodge us from our traditional moorings. This is the Bruschke talks about. Must disorganize in order to reorganize. So if the control of people was what they were seeking, then it is logical to determine that those things that previously had motivated us to action had to be dismantled. The obvious ones being any constitutional cleavages. They knew they had to remove our trust in those same Western institutions, our values that had previously defined us, to change society, to change national morale, to change how we thought. Not one institution at a time, like Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley admit, but all of them at once. Enter cancel culture, insert stimulus, observe, maintain, and manage with behavioral feedback loops. They were building to suit, on the fly, the necessary mind for a future Fabian model of industrial democracy, or what its author, George Bernard Shaw, described as the problem of combining administrative efficiency with popular control. Some more diagrams showing feedback loop, showing steps to things. They're showing how we go from here to there. And our meaning and purpose is key. Meaning and purpose. If we have a meaning and purpose, we're good. We can't actually be influenced by them very much if we have our own healthy meaning and purpose. But it was up to them to commandeer our meaning and purpose. We see largely today in the West, our meanings and purposes have been hijacked, and we're, largely immersed in identity politics and false dilemmas, binary thinking, this or that, zeros and ones. So here being a key moment to recall, the Fabians were heavily involved in the creation of the Covenant of the League of Nations at the Inter-Allied Conferences long before Paris 1919, Shaw executive and Webb the chair. If cybernetics means to steer or govern our ship, and men like George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb are at the helm, then we can all of a sudden shed some real light on an obscure part of history that desperately needs it. We can, from the documents provided here, determine who has been the most responsible for our present day situation, while also providing us the necessary historical context with which to solve it. Within this history, we find the answers as well. Knowing these things helps us both determine what to invest our time in and what to ignore. Our investigation already not leaving much to be desired. Secret societies rule the world. And it is these social science research institutions that have really been deeply detrimental to the morality of the West. And if it was up to me, those would be the first things to go. This incessant studying of human beings and then applying the found information back to then steer. Psychotic. So the third and final connection we need to make in our open-ended investigation starts with William Curtis Farabee. He's one of the guys in the inquiry standing in the back row, all military dressed. He was similar to Isaiah Bowman in that he went down to South America on the West Coast and up that side of South America mapping. And he actually died from malaria on his third trip, I believe. But he's an ethnobiologist and only the second person to receive a PhD in biological anthropology from Harvard. History has it that he was a key director of the inquiry and acted as a military intelligence liaison in Paris. That is absolutely fact or truth. Farabee is most well known today for his pioneering work assisting the scientific foundation of human genetics. He just so happens to be the one pointed to most for first observing Mendelian genetics in man. Farabee, as the president of the American Anthropological Association, here we are. We see how they control now by being presidents of these large, comprehensive national organizations or institutions, also playing a key role in propagating Mendel's ideas into the human sciences. So Farabee is actually promoting William Bateson and Mendel together. It's a coordinated, concerted effort to popularize Mendel and Mendelian heredity, founding the word genetics. And it all comes from his research into peas in a pod. Talk about hive minds, their study of honeybees. They want us all to be very similar, liberally minded, progressive, open to radical social change, and nearly every idea in the book. And here we see they're coming from the same circles. So just as T.H. Huxley and the rest of the Royal Society worked like a bulldog weaponizing social Darwinism as an entering wedge, so too William Bateson and William Curtis Farabee established Mendelian command of heredity. So some early images of man and machine here, humani victis instrumenta. They needed to make machines more human-like and humans more machine-like. We see this resolve, right? This coming together, like we're seeing the Canadian liberal left and the American right. We see both those avenues of research evolving right in front of us. Now both gigantic branches within bioscience themselves, they meet in the middle, joining in a singularity. Study of man, study of machine. Cybernetics itself becomes the new science. The Frankfurt School model of social, political, and applied science becomes the prevailing and accepted mainstream science. For the grand strategists, science becomes the study of humans more than a study for the truth. What we witness today is the natural, elaborate imaginations first hatched in the awkwardness of humani victis instrumenta, and now refined nearly as perfect as Boris Artsabashev's paintings. We're seeing some of the early interpretations of man and machine in the art and drawings, because this also helps with national morale. Art, music. We're going to get into that in a future pop music series that I've been wanting to get into for well over a decade, but there's more important things to get through, and we're just about there. So they saw human behavior as a step-by-step syllogistic exercise, deductive, one step at a time. They presented our neuronal interactions as propositional functions. The human self appeared to be computationally constituted, in McCulloch's words, and the more information gathered, the more likely the behavior was able to be predicted. And this is Oliver Wendell Holmes's dream. So the future, perfect, in grammatical terms is a verb form and used to describe an event that is expected or planned to happen before a time of reference in the future. Rome will have fallen by then. The sentence is in the future perfect tense. Will have fallen, a combining or combination of a modal verb will, a perfect infinite have, and a past participle fallen. Simply put, the future perfect is a grammatical combination of the future and perfect tenses, a grammatical aspect that views an event as prior and completed, preferring to focus on the result rather than the occurrence itself. Ways and means, cause and effect. It speaks to a built-in assumption like that in A Brave New World or 1984. So preferring to focus on the result rather than the occurrence itself. It speaks to a built-in assumption. It speaks to a built-in assumption. Twice I wrote that. It is a rather ambitious claim to make that one day all people will be happy members of Pleasantville, but this controlling oligarchy, as Aldous Huxley defined them, who've always existed and presumably always will exist, must have calculated into their ultimate revolution machine a constant in the public's level of apathy, or at best we can conclude that they considered there being no more resistance to their plan than can necessarily be raised to stop it. Huxley himself, in the author's foreword of Brave New World, provides inspiration for us. And I've covered this. He's quoted in the foreword of A Brave New World as saying, for the immediate future is likely to resemble the immediate past. And in the immediate past, rapid technological changes taking place in a mass-producing economy and among a population predominantly propertyless have always tended to produce economic and social confusion. To deal with the confusion, power has been centralized and government control increased. It is probable that all the world's governments will be more or less completely totalitarian, fascist, even before the harnessing of atomic energy. That they will be totalitarian during and after the harnessing seems almost certain. Only a large-scale popular movement towards decentralization and self-help can arrest the present tendency towards statism or fascism or internationalism, globalism. At present, there is no sign that such a movement will take place, and I am saying that there is a movement afoot presently, and this is it. This understanding of where we are and what's actually going on. This move towards self-help and decentralization has to start happening if we have any hope of surviving all of this. So what we see existing between the early social science work of the inquiry and the cybernetics revolution a generation later is a continuously active ethos and a homogeneity of leadership, and the same concepts just further realized than before, further evolved, more efficient. We have in the two father-son relationships of Bateson and Wiener two prominent connections to the early scientific study of humans. Rothschild similarly funding both the Inter-Allied meetings in Paris 1919 and the Third International meetings on genetics in 1906. Hosting inquiry members for private garden discussions regarding the post-war world, just as was done with the delegates of the Third International meetings on genetics in London and New York. Today, their stranglehold on mass communication hasn't changed much, as Bernays is great uncle to Mark Bernays Randolph. Who's he? The founder and first CEO of Netflix. Some of you may already know that, but that is true. So when you sit down to watch something on Netflix, understand you are being completely propagandized, and the truth is not primary. Your consent is, and your attention, because attention is the new oil. They said that we've already saw where Paris Peace Conference, these economists talked about the Brits and the Americans in the West wanting this new oil. And so then we see that actually in the 90s and 2000s became the new data. And now we're seeing in the 2020s, your attention is now being replaced as the most important commodity that they can have beyond oil, beyond data. It's your attention. So it's about you and your addictions to the spectacle. Can you break free? Hopefully that this history is starting to motivate you to see that we're just, despite all of our rage, we're still rats in a cage. So this just further evidence that we now have heard enough of history's reverberations, echoes to acknowledge the rhymes of history, the World Federation of Mental Health. Today, in the year 2023, now 2026, so closely intertwined with the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and United Nations Educational and Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. So to conclude, as we are in the home stretch here, we are dominated by a relatively small number of people. It is they who pull the wires, which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Propaganda, page 38. Through research published in the Future Perfect Part 1, we learned the detail and depth of interlocking memberships in the creation of the League of Nations. We have now successfully shown that it is precisely through a variety of private social clubs and elite fraternal orders and secret societies that national and international decisions are made and broken. Since before our grandparents were born, Bernays says it himself, this invisible intertwining structure of groupings and associations is the mechanism by which democracy has organized its group mind and simplified its mass thinking. Yet it must be remembered that these thousands of groups interlace. John Jones, besides being a Rotarian, is a member of a church, a fraternal order, of a political party, of a charitable organization, of a professional organization, of a local chamber of commerce, of a league for or against prohibition, or of a society for or against lowering the tariff. The opinion which he receives as a Rotarian will tend to disseminate in the other groups in which he may have influence. It is extremely difficult to realize how many and diverse are these cleavages of society. They may be social, political, economic, racial, religious, or ethical, with hundreds of subdivisions of each. This is what they recognized, and now they divide us through these subdivisions. I don't even think I need to explain that. You just need to look around, and I don't advise this, but all you got to do is watch the mainstream media for a minute. Bernays then declaratively states, as they tend to do in the future perfect tense, to deplore the existence of such a mechanism is to ask for a society such as never was and never will be. To admit that it exists, but to expect that it shall not be used is unreasonable. Famous quote from Woodrow Wilson here in New Freedom. So we at the History of Propaganda wholeheartedly take offense to such statements. So just as they were founded, these institutions can be dismantled. To believe we are doomed is the very purpose of their propaganda. And the modern manipulation of the masses is abhorrent to the laws of nature. So in conclusion, so where are we? Simply put, we are in a petri dish. As I've said before, the great experiment, they all write about it. All subjects in Robert Cecil's autobiography, A Great Experiment. Cecil's fellow League creator, James T. Shotwell, called the same reform movement a strange experiment in the social and political sciences. In fact, from Aldous Huxley and Club 1917 to Bertrand Russell and the Cambridge Apostles, from William Howard Taft's League to Enforce Peace to Robert Cecil's League of Nations Union, the word experiment is used very predominantly, finding its way into all their League literature and collective security, the emotive mechanism used in achieving the manufactured consent of the public, what Bernays called the creation of circumstances. You can see that the mainstream media is basically built to do that. This is the modus operandi, method of operation. The main function of mass communication is the creation of circumstances to create fear. So Hegel called them dialectics. We call this phenomenon the delicate art of persuasion. The invisible pulling of wires Bernays speaks of preys on our empathy and is only made possible through our interaction with it, our attention. And these strategists and engineers also seem to be unified in presenting the League and a move towards the Great Society in the future perfect tense, as if their dominance is assured and everything will have already been. But there remains another certainty equally acknowledged in their writings, that throughout this entire ordeal, through 100 years of radical experimentation, with its constant reaffirmations, there still remains a control group A large demographic still more interested in the truth than consensus. This resistance to their experimentation of a foundational truth as we witness ever-growing numbers of people resisting the League's modern manifestation, the UN, and everything that is coming out of there. World Economic Forum. By 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. Right? We start to see the connections here. So there are those who, like the experimenters themselves, see the line error written right into the code and look to this fact as an immense opportunity to push back against the suggestion of total authoritarianism or totalitarianism, because it is fascist. We have shown where the book that sort of derives all of this has a fasces on the cover, the principles of scientific management. The social engineers themselves were even forced to consider it in their modeling and admitted by Huxley himself. Unfortunately, at the moment of writing those words, he saw no such movement taking place. So on November 22nd, 2023, we will celebrate the 60th anniversary of Huxley's death. And as we sit at the precipice of falling helplessly into Huxley's furthest, most privately held imaginations, we now see rising more prominent than ever just such a movement. An ever-growing larger number of people beginning to see that this strange experiment went wrong in its conception, that the control of humans on a mass scale, as advertised in Hollywood metaphor, is beyond inhumane and may not even be possible. Their plan, as always, ambitious, and as we, their children of the future, observe 100 years of history since its creation, hard conclusions are now being made. So welcome, my fellow time traveler. Those of us living in the year 2026 are living in the days only alluded to in Huxley's A Brave New World or Orwell's 1984. Those unseen and unspoken days of great cataclysmic upheaval and turmoil are now upon us, plain to see. The great taming of nature and the human mind is at hand. The war for your mind is on. And rather than the abrupt and brutal attempt at conquest by a material force we were expecting, we are seeing a far more subtle, sophisticated, and discreet social science experiment taking place, built on the delicate art of persuasion and consent that's systemic, infused through legislation and regulation, made possible through fear of the future, crisis government. This presents an enemy requiring of us a more thoughtful approach if we are to win. And we believe, as does Huxley, only a large-scale popular movement towards decentralization and self-help can stop it. And part of that self-help is understanding your history. So that's why I do these things, to let the record show that 60 plus years after Huxley's death, the movement has finally arrived. The Future Perfect, Part 2. Okay, so you can find me at thehistoryofpropaganda@gmail.com. You can find me at PayPal, historyofpropaganda@gmail.com, and you can buy me a coffee at History of Propaganda. And I'm at Substack with nothing there yet, but there will be. And you can find me there at Diego Garcia, History of Propaganda. So I hope this was helpful. Hope this helps you see our world a little clearer, helps you identify more clearly the ideologies and the thought processes that are really conflicting our modern world. And at the basis of all of it is progress still. So appreciate your time. I'll talk to you again soon.